So what are the two pillars of AUKUS? First, as you mentioned, there is the submarine piece. The submarine piece is generally well understood. It's a capability that will allow Australia to do a lot more with its submarine fleet. We don't have to get into those details today, but a lot more with its submarine fleet than it can with air-breathing, conventionally powered submarines. But the Pillar 1 arrangement, which was announced on Monday, was all about how do we get Australia nuclear-powered submarines in a timeframe that is strategically relevant, both in terms of getting Australia the submarines before our existing Collins-class fleet begin to be retired, and also getting Australia the submarines at the speed of relevance insofar as assessments about the deteriorating regional balance of power is concerned. So that was a narrow, if you like, although very important objective of AUKUS, the Pillar 1 initiative. The Pillar 2 initiative is more interesting, as you say, and that's really about defence industrial integration in two, I think, key ways. One, it's called the Advanced Capabilities Pillar, and it has several areas of priority interest, from hypersonics and counter-hypersonics to electronic warfare to advanced cyber capabilities to other underwater autonomous systems, and there are others. But it's zeroed in on a few niche areas of emerging advantage when it comes, or potential advantage when it comes to military capabilities in 21st century conflict. The second part of Pillar 2, if you like, is about mixing up our defence industrial bases, our technology sectors and our traditional defence sectors in ways that allow us to seamlessly collaborate, which is something that we have never been able to do before. Now, it is about giving expression to the part of the US defence strategy that says we will incorporate allies and partners into every stage of defence policy, from defence industrial collaboration right through to warfighting. AUKUS zeroes in on that very first stage. If it's successful, and I think there are a lot of problems, but if it's successful, that Pillar 2 initiative will fuse our defence industrial bases and will also drive some kind of reform agenda that brings in the technology sectors of our respective economies and industrial bases that have become increasingly unwilling to work in the national security space because of the problems and the burdens of engaging in that space. The political consensus in Australia around AUKUS and the alliance is rock solid. There are fringes in both parties, and you've identified some of those. There are other fringe perspectives on both the right and the left that, for different reasons, have an axe to grind when it comes to the AUKUS arrangement, or in some cases when it comes to the much longer standing process of alliance integration between Australia and the United States. And it's motivated by a shared assessment that the regional balance of power is deteriorating. Chinese capabilities are rising rapidly. Chinese intentions are an unknown, but they don't look good from where we sit. And US capabilities by themselves are insufficient to deal with that changing equation. And so to put this into a broader context, if you like, and where I think the Australian political consensus is supporting an agenda of collective defence, of integrated defence in the US parlance in the region that moves from an order in which the US unilaterally upheld the balance of power and all of the attendant burdens of that, to one in which countries, especially Australia and Japan, need to play increasingly frontline and regional roles in collectively upholding that balance of power, without which there won't be a balance of power.
Brits play a significant role, and that is where they're going to use their design for a nuclear-powered submarine, the SSN AUKUS, that is going to have embedded in it American technology, including vertical launch system, the tubes that allow it to fire cruise missiles. And Australia is going to build and purchase that. So it's going to be built jointly in the UK and Australia at the same time, and result in a submarine fleet where they have Virginia-class submarines and then the new SSN AUKUS. So there's a lot of moving pieces in there, and as you think about it over those timeframes, I think there are different costs and risks across the different partners. Up front, Australia has to bear a lot of the costs. They're making investments in US and British industry to help expand shipbuilding capacity. They're going to have to make investments in training and learning about nuclear propulsion and how to maintain and operate these systems safely. The US is going to be potentially one of the biggest beneficiaries with this expanded presence and posture in the region that will help to make its presence in East Asia more resilient. Right now, U.S. SSNs rely entirely or mainly on a base in Guam, which we all know can be targeted by Chinese long-range missiles. So having another rear base that's fairly far away and another potential hub for operations is really significant. Over the medium term is where I think it starts to get complicated. Australia is the beneficiary and gets to purchase the SSN, so they're going to get the Virginia-class submarines, a very, very capable boat, but one that has large manning requirements and is going to be a little bit challenging to figure out how to operate. The U.S., I think, is taking some risk in the medium term. It's reducing the size of our biggest asset, our undersea fleet, in that window when people are really worried about the balance starting to shift. In the long term, I think it gets more complicated for Australia because they have to operate two different types of submarines that are nuclear powered simultaneously, which are going to have different maintenance and training requirements. There's going to be a big benefit of shipbuilding in Australia in the latter phase, but there is a significant price tag. We don't know exactly what it is, but the billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that are being quoted over the 30 years is a lot. And I'm not sure they're going to actually achieve much in terms of economies of scale by buying two different types of boats. I think for the U.S., the long-term concern is industrial base, how it sustains its shipbuilding capacity that's going to expand. If it is able to produce the extra boats that are needed for Australia, how does it sustain that going forward, thinking about the next generation of SSN, which also gets more complicated because of something in Pillar 2, which is the unmanned underwater vehicles, which are likely to be maturing in this time frame.
First of all, the U.S. and shipbuilding industrial base is incredibly fragile right now.
Yeah.
And the U.S. Congress has been trying to increase the number of submarine production since at least the last 10 years. And we're up to now 1.2 boats a year, okay? And there's just so many constraints and capacity problems that are there. And the issue is now we're going to, we have the Columbia class we're putting on, now we're going to put this on. Yeah, it's 10 years, 15 years down the road, but there's some real concerns.
To rewind until 2011, when Australia and the US began doing force posture cooperation, which was formalized in the treaty in 2014, the only real stickiness at a sort of military operational level in terms of a structure were the joint facilities, was Pine Gap, the sort of intelligence facilities in Australia that provided situational awareness and early alert and all sorts of things to combined forces. But beyond that, the US-Australia alliance was very different to alliances in Korea and Japan, where combined military planning, at least for the direct defense of those countries, was a big part of how the alliances operated. So beginning in 2014 and then really accelerating in the last 5 years, you've seen a series of posture initiatives that have kind of been hiding in plain sight.
Every time this comes up, people talk about export controls, they talk about ITAR. I dealt with India at the end of the Bush administration when dealing with the release community was a lot of fun. You know what that's like, where I would have to explain that the President of the United States actually wanted a strategic relationship with India, and there was some part of that the release community probably ought to understand. But some of this is not just about resistance, it's about legislation, it's about ITAR, it's about changing the way the system is set up in the United States to accommodate what's needed for AUKUS.
ITAR, when looking at ITAR, I think we have to look at where the U.S. technological dominance is or is not anymore. Mm-hmm. And as ITAR developed, it essentially was created around a series of technologies that the U.S. created in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which were beyond any in the world. And so we put a box around those, so to speak. And this box was designed at a time when there was nobody else. We didn't have a near peer on these technologies. And as this technology has evolved over time, we have two things have happened. One, our allies are no longer just takers of technologies. They're creators of technology, and frankly, in ways that are actually, in many cases, superior than what we're doing in our industrial base. And the second is probably even more important, is that the driver of technology in the last 20 years has not been the militaries of the West or of our adversaries, but the commercial marketplace. And ITAR does not work well with either our allies or the commercial marketplace. It is designed in such a way that when you come into contact with it, the U.S. government now controls everything through a process that you can term as the either ITAR contamination or ITAR taint or whatever that whenever a U.S. person touches that technology, it has to go back to the State Department for a mother may I. So what that does, incentive-wise, is it creates tremendous incentive for our partners, and particularly the commercial marketplace, to never deal with the Department of Defense and the U.S. government. And why is that significant? Because the vast majority of technologies in not only Pillar 2, but the technologies that the Chief Technology Officer of the Department of Defense says that we need to be superior in the future are out there in the commercial marketplace.
When you look at technology release, things that Australia is going to procure through a foreign military sales or through direct military sales, it goes through a very, very long and cumbersome process within the Pentagon and across other agencies of giving everyone a say, of giving every part of the US system, every service and so forth, a say about whether or not there are any concerns of the release of this technology. Now, again, that makes a lot of sense 99% of the time for most countries. But when it comes to Australia and Britain, or to the US's closest allies from a warfighting and co-development of military capabilities perspective, that mindset just doesn't make sense. 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago, it was announced that Australia would buy Tomahawk missiles from the United States. There is still not an FMS case. Presumably, somewhere in the bowels of the Pentagon, 900 people are still being asked if it's a good idea. And the frustrating thing about that is the answer is nearly always yes, particularly from those who wear uniforms that are consulted. But the time it takes to go through the process is crippling. If we don't get this right, we won't get the capability in a time frame of relevance. We won't be empowered. We'll be a less valuable US alliance partner in that regard. We'll be a less valuable military power. The second issue is if you don't get it right in terms of the defence industrial collaboration piece, what Australia has to offer, and Australia has a short list of world-leading capabilities in the technology space, sonar, the CEA radar, which is world-class. Until recently, the Ghost Bat air teaming system, which is now owned by the State Department through the reasons that Bill outlined, but it was a platform developed by the Australian Air Force to be an autonomous warfighting aerial vehicle.
You need allies for posture reasons, but in reality, it's deeper than that. The U.S. is not in a position right now where it can deter both Russia and China by itself. And we therefore, there was a report I wrote with my colleague Becca Wasser. We argue that we have to find ways to combine in a meaningful way our capabilities with our allies and partners. And I think in the past 30 years, we've had all these multilateral alliances for all of our operations, but a lot of that has been for political show and less for the capability that they bring.
The democracies only have so much STEM talent, engineering and scientific talent. And AUKUS provides the opportunity to bring together on some of these new emerging, potentially disruptive technologies that are not being used today. Submarines are extremely important and so on, but in the emerging tech areas, pooling our resources and adopting those technologies to military means in a near-term, urgent manner. If we can do that between the closest allies, the AUKUS allies, we should be able to expand that aperture out to the next level of allies, whether they're the NATO allies, Japan, Korea. And the key thing is how to break and cut down this Gordian knot of bureaucratic barriers to working together to achieve disruptive innovation, to achieve disruptive capabilities. That, to me, is what AUKUS is all about. The next level is, can we get the Australians building precision-guided munitions? I hope so, because we need a lot more of them. And we can do that if we reform ITAR and start making the investments and going down forward. So